savage Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock Pacific. We are always here to interview someone amazing. And that amazing person today is Greg Harkavy, leader of mortgage coaching for Building Champions. What's up, Greg?
Just got me in the airport on my way to Bentonville, Arkansas, and can't wait to get started with today's live talk. So,
do you have a direct flight to Bentonville? Is there a live flight?
Is there such a thing? No, I have to connect through Denver. So I have an hour between Denver to Bentonville too. So I'm like, all right, I've got my running shoes on. Yeah.
Well, thank you for making time to bring value to the mortgage coach community. We really appreciate it. Before we get into the content with Greg, I do want to remind folks, we've got a lot of value happening in our Facebook group. It seems like just a record number of mortgage professionals are not only getting in that group, but getting active in that group. So if you're watching this and you're not active, be active. And active means liking things that you like and commenting on things that you can add value to. I do want to shine a light on the interview I did yesterday with Sean Herrera with G-Rate. I mean, it's such an awesome, I had a little alert come up. Sorry about that. It's such an awesome conversation I had with him. This dude has only been a full-time loan officer for 3 years. He is going to surpass 70 million in production this year. And he's just doing it right. Like if you listen to his interview, how I know who I am now. I'm an educator. And not everybody's going to want to do business with me with how I do business. I lose business because of my model. But he's really clear on his model that I'm education first, and I use video, I use technology. He's used Mortgage Coach since day one. Check it out. I've gotten a number of text messages today from people who said, I loved the scripting. I loved some of the takeaways that he had. So check that out. It's on our YouTube channel. It's on our Facebook group. I think it's an important interview. And my last comment on it, to me, my takeaway was, hearing this loan officer that started using Mortgage Coach as a competitive advantage, like that was, I just wanted the competitive advantage of the TCA, but today he uses it because it's a communication platform. So it was all about, like if you hear his conversation, it's all about helping me communicate more clearly, more effectively, more efficiently. So he's using Mortgage Coach because it's a communication platform. So check that interview out. It's very important. If you are a manager or a leader, forward it to your team. And it's a good segue to bring in Greg. Greg, him and I want to do a couple interviews a year, 3, 4. And he had this idea like 6 months ago. He's like, Dave, communication is the heart of every successful producer. And I think I have some ideas that are fundamental to communication to help people communicate more. So Greg, why don't you kind of set it up, the topic, and then let's have the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Maybe the genesis of saying, hey, communication, why do we bring it back? So I might have shared this story with you before, but my wife and I, we try and have a date once a week. And it was a week where just super busy. And she's like, well, I'm getting my hair done. Do you want to have a date with me at the hairstylist? I'm like, sure. So I put a picnic bag together, got some wine, and we chilled out. And as soon as I walk in, her hairstylist starts ranting and raving about a horrible mortgage experience. And she's like, why are they asking me for all these documents? And complicated borrower, she's 1099 and has a lot of rental properties. And what I fundamentally heard was the same issue I heard when I was originating in 1990. The communication piece was brutal. And she didn't understand what was going on, just the details of communication. And I could see that there was some behavioral language stuff going on that she didn't understand. And it was clear that the loan officer was asking for things that were rightfully important to get the loan shipped and insured. But how they communicated was brutal. And it just brought me back to why things worked and why they didn't work when I was an originator. And the story today, 30 years later, is the same. It's all about communication. And then I spend time with operations and production people. And the classic conflicts happen all the time. You get siloed between production and ops. When you start breaking it down from a behavioral language, you start to understand why. But until you start to understand your own language and be able to cross those barriers, those silos have a really good chance of getting fortified rather than broken down. So that was the genesis of it. But what DISC is, go ahead.
So time out before you do that. I want to unpack two things. So one, I hope everybody caught this. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Like when he was hearing this rant, it wasn't like, oh, this loan officer's asking for things that other loan officers weren't. It was like the timing, the way. It was not what was being asked, it was how it was being asked. So I just want to make sure you caught that. And then Greg, we have a lot of new loan officers coming into the market. And I hear all the time that they use our YouTube channel as an educational platform. So just in case someone has not heard you before, if you could just give us a minute on, how long you've been in the business, your coaching, because I want everybody to know, like, guys, this is a rock star mortgage executive and one of the top coaches in the industry. Just give us a minute on that in case there's a new LO that doesn't know who you are. That would just be helpful before we get into it.
Thank you. Yeah, quick story. I was pretty much slated to become an attorney. I watched my brother's career take off in the mortgage industry. And as I was a freshman in college, I'm like, course correction, I'll finish college, but I'm getting into the mortgage industry. So my family tried to convince me against it. And that's all I needed to know, that I was getting into it. So I kind of do the opposite sometimes of what I'm told. So 1990, straight out of college, I'm already studying 4155, Fannie Freddie guidelines. I'm learning the business before I put my name on a card. So I take my college graduation trip to the East Coast. I come back and I'm a loan officer and I'm already understanding how to underwrite loans, but I'm an originator. So pretty much from that point in time, I went from my first year doing pretty well. I don't know, maybe closed 30 loans, tripled my production my second year. By the time I had finished, I was the #1 producer in the mortgage company as a producing branch manager. So that was my personal career that ran for 13 years. And I've been coaching people in the mortgage business for over 19 years now total. I've had the fortune to work with some pretty large companies, from top producers that are doing 175 million this year to CEOs of mortgage companies.
So guys, this is a guy who's coached, over 10,000 hours at the coaching table and talked to a lot of top performers. And he's also done our job, your job, understands it really clearly. So let's get into it, because I think this is important. While I know DISC, I've taken DISC scores. Every time I talk about it, I learn something. So why don't you walk us through the presentation you want, and let's talk about how to turn communication into your advantage.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and go into screen share mode. And what we're going to just walk through are really the basics of DISC, because I don't assume anybody here knows all the nuances of it. So I'm going to run through this really quickly. And if you have any questions, feel free to pause me, Dave. But let's go ahead and dive in.
Cool. We see it, and it is in presentation mode.
Yeah, great. So really, this is the key of why do we use DISC. DISC, in essence, is a behavioral language. It's been around since BC times, a long time now. But we use it to make sure that we understand an individual style. But for your purposes, the first thing I want you to think about, and maybe in the context of emotional intelligence, self-awareness is key. You have to understand who you are, how you show up, how people experience you. Most of us just kind of look through the lens of, aren't we all the same? I'm going to share an infographic in a little bit that you'll realize the percentage of people that actually think and behave like you are quite small. Huge opportunity for communication challenges. So you want to understand yourself. You want to be able to recognize other people's style. And then adapting your style, not in your environment, but being able to understand, hey, I communicate like this. The individual that I'm communicating with right now might communicate differently. How do I adapt to their language? And that's where it becomes a huge competitive advantage in pretty much all relationships. Go ahead, Dave.
Hey, Greg, before we go off this slide, anything you have around improving your self-awareness, or getting a pulse check on, like, hey, am I really, like I think I'm really self-aware, and I think everybody thinks they're really self-aware, but I think some people are more self-aware than others. Any advice on that?
Yes. And we'll be sharing a link as well to get access to it. But first of all, making sure that you do take a DISC profile. That's the first step of self-awareness, understanding, hey, who am I behaviorally? We also have an emotional intelligence assessment that measures self-awareness, awareness of others, self-regulation, other components of emotional intelligence. The third is a 360 feedback. We have specific assessments where we have you as an individual rate yourself, and then other people that you work with rate you on those same categories. And it's incredible insight, because you might rate yourself here on something and the group might rate you here. So your self-awareness of what you think versus how people are perceiving you gets illuminated. So several different ways to do that, but I think self-awareness is the beginning of healthy relationships.
Love that. Thank you, man.
You got it. All right, so we're going to do a quick run through DISC. And when you hear it, I mean, for me, it sounds like, well, is it, Frisbee DISC? Is it something that, your back DISC? No, it's actually an acronym for 4 primary behavioral styles. So we're going to run through what those are. And as I'm sharing this, maybe try and self-identify. Even if your self-awareness isn't super high yet, or you haven't done an assessment, chances are you're going to relate to one of these primary behavioral styles. So the first, the D, stands for dominance. And it's really, this person is a driver. They're task-oriented, non-emotion-based, typically visionary, bottom-line oriented, multitask. They usually come off very energetic. They like to drive conversations. The I is an influencer, and they are people-oriented, emotion-based. They're typically what we think are extroverts, but both D's and I's are introverts. The I, however, sees a stranger as a friend they haven't met yet. They're usually the life of the party. They gravitate towards behaviors around people and contacts, where a D, a driver or someone that's dominant, gravitates towards problems and challenges. The S is for somebody that's steady. Like the I, they're people-oriented, emotion-based, but they're introverted. They prefer to maybe have deeper relationships with a few people. Pace and consistency is their gig. So you start to see, okay, as we play this out a little bit, a D might have some different approaches. A D might say, hey, let's stick to business. An S is like, hey, let's begin with a personal comment. Let's break the ice. So straight out of the gate, you start having some challenges. Now, I want to pause here for a minute before we even go to the C. When you start to think about most of the origination force, people in production, they tend to be extroverted. So they're usually going to have some combination of D and I. Not always, but they tend to be. And then when you start getting into support and operations, they tend to be a little more introverted. So your S's, and then your C, those that are compliant, they are like the D. They're task-oriented, non-emotion-based. They're analytical. They're paying attention to the details. Their motto might be, quality is job one. So they probably love forward. Maybe not. Maybe they pay attention to quality and like, yeah, I prefer something more precise. But they're always paying attention to the details. The D's and the C's, generally speaking, because they're task-oriented, don't personalize. They're able to get straight to business. Your I's and S's are about feelings and emotions. So when you start to think about S's and C's and D's and I's, start painting pictures. If you're an originator, possibly an underwriter might be someone that would fall into that S or C category, maybe even a processor and vice versa. Any thoughts or questions, Dave, before I hop into the next quick slide?
So I want to push the community. First of all, anyone who's been through the DISC score and you know what your score is, I'd love to know. Put it below, so put it in comments. Hey, I'm a high DI, I'm a DS, whatever your 2 dominant categories are. I would love to see that in comments, whether it's in Zoom, whether it's in Facebook Live. So guys, what are you? I will tell you, I'm a high DI, and I'm like, very low in S&C. Those are not my strengths. And so full disclosure there. So put some comments below. And then if you have questions for Greg during this call, we plan this so that he's going to provide a lot of content and education, but we also have open space for questions. So you've got one of America's best coaches on the phone. We're talking about communication style. If you have questions for Greg, put them down below. Anyways, keep it going, brother.
Thank you. All right, so if we look at the D, being task oriented. They're also direct communicators. Some of the emotions, sometimes when they're intense, you might feel frustration. There can be an intensity with a D that people feel. If you're a D yourself, you're probably like, okay, I get it, I resonate. Other different styles, we're going to start to see where are the differences, where are the commonalities. But if you think about maybe some famous behavioral styles that are a D, right? These two characters right here are classic Ds. Donald Trump, and you might recognize Oprah there as well. So when you start to think about who do we see and what's the persona we get from people, you know, Trump might be a lightning rod, and I'm not going to get into a political tirade, but I think one of the things that might tweak people the most is when he goes so direct that it doesn't allow some people to enter in. His communication style is probably a little bit rough. We might all agree, regardless of what we think on policy. But he is a driver, he's a visionary, and the same with Oprah. When you think about the I, there's optimism that comes from an I. They're indirect communicators, however. They may not enter conflict the same, and it's because they actually emotionalize their behaviors and feelings. So it makes it harder to come direct. If you're task-oriented, non-emotion based, you can come direct. You detach the emotion from whatever the situation is. So even though you've got D's and I's that might group together as a common pairing for an individual, the I wants to relate. The I really wants to make sure that people feel good. So communication may not be as direct with an I. Some famous ones there. I mean, Jim Carrey, Ellen, you know, just this bubbliness. Dave,
Hey,
looks like you're.
yeah, time out. So would you say it's more likely that an I might be more passive aggressive? You know, is that possible of the
Maybe.
categories?
Yes, maybe. Because, and I say maybe because I think every behavioral style has that potential. But it might be a little bit harder not to be because you are so concerned about relationships that you may not want to enter the conflict. You don't want to strain the relationship. So yeah, you might come off a little more passive aggressive. Same could be said of S. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I just want to remind everybody, and I've talked about it a lot when we've built out and we've got really clear on what is a black belt at Mortgage Coach.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the frameworks that I lean on a lot is the whole challenger sale, which is tailor, teach, control, wrapped in constructive tension. And I do think, you know, just from the eyes that I know, they tend to be more people pleasing, say yes. And when you look at how to be the most successful mortgage professional, it's so important that you're not afraid of constructive tension and you embrace that. And again, keep it constructive. So I just wanted to connect, you know, DISC to that framework that we have. And maybe at some point I'll just show the framework and remind everybody of, you know, the Mortgage Coach black belt framework. But I just wanted to, you know, I don't know, put an explanation on that. Also, we had a number of people reach out so far. We've got a high DI, an ID, a DS, and a DC. So far, everyone who's weighed in has a D in their, you know, top two categories. But we've literally got someone in every category with a high D being one of the two. So
yeah, the DC and the DS, we'll talk about that a little bit. So maybe you guys will get a little extra color there because those are more unusual combinations. Beautiful strengths and challenges with every blending, but those are a little more unique. So cool to hear some of the styles. You know, Dave, before we do move on to the next, just even with conflict resolution with an I versus a D. D's really, they look at things like, hey, let's tackle problems and challenges. They go straight in. Conflict's not an issue. For an I, it's an emotional deal. So I think there's a dynamic tension there. But you mentioned, I think, really an influencer with a C is one of the most challenging combos of all. So when you look at an I and a C, the attention to details and process versus somebody that's maybe an influencer and wants to go based off of feelings and emotions, where a C is like, show me the facts and figures. If you're sloppy with a high C and you're talking about feelings when they want facts, disconnect. It's a real challenge. So you can't win everybody over. by making them feel better, and an I is going to have the hardest time trying to sell a C. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So,
Love that.
yeah. So here's our S. They might be considered more guarded. By the way, as we get into S's and C's, if you have not read the book Quiet, I highly recommend it. It is all about understanding introversion. I think in our society, especially, the introverts are not revered as much as they should be. It tends to be the person that's loudest in the room gets more of the attention and is considered a leader. But if you don't tap into and draw into the beauty of introspection and what an introvert brings, you're missing a lot of wisdom. So an S will be more guarded by nature. They're not necessarily going to share their opinions, especially in unfamiliar groups. They're very people-oriented. They develop stability. They're also like the I. They're not direct communicators. Like if you talk about the passive aggressive, yes, I would think might have more of a tendency for passive aggressive. So here's a scenario. D's and S's are a big conflict. Typically a D is like, hey, let's jump straight into business. Let's get to the point. And an S is like, slow down. So I, like you, Dave, hi, D, hi, I. And I remember walking into the office as an originator and asking, hey, did that Jones file get submitted? Didn't say hi. My I was like suppressed. And I'm like, she said, yes. I'm like, cool, everything's great. I walked in my office and I noticed like, I'm kind of getting the cold shoulder from my processor. What did I do? I didn't know, but I sensed something. She's like, you didn't even ask me about my doctor's appointment. Just totally missed it. Like, so I'm just a means to an end. That's how it feels sometimes if we're in D mode and we approach an S without really saying, hey, you as a person matters more. Even though I cared deeply about her and her success, I was in D mode and I completely missed it. Because there was a high trust relationship that I had with her, she was able to express it. If there wasn't, I wouldn't have known, and she probably never would have mentioned what I had done. Would have been missed. But there would have been this kind of groundswell of resistance that passive aggressive might have built up to, hey, I'm giving you my resignation notice. A little caveat, and I don't know if this is fair, but I do find when people are super high D, they might have higher turnover with their teammates than others because they don't connect with their people as much. They're driving to results and they don't feel connected to the person. So,
Hey, Greg, first of all, I love that. And I love that, just pro tip from a team perspective when you've got a team member that's high I to, people first, emotions first. Anything come to mind when your prospect is a high S, how you approach, kind of like that same pro tip, only, with a prospect? Anything come to mind?
yeah, I ask how questions rather than what or whys. There's one do that I think is very high. It's present your case softly, non-threateningly. If you come off as hyper and you're like wanting to get to the bottom line, you're probably going to turn off an S. So I don't know if you're
S
yeah,
for slower, S
slow
for
down.
slower. Yeah, slow. Got it.
Yeah, connect.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Because most mortgage loan officers are, whether they're high D or high I, D is in the mix. And so I think that's a great one. Like when you sense that your prospect is a high S or C, you go in just a little slower, a little softer.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and it's a D being a driver, you're the locomotive, and if you think about everybody you have to connect with as linking as a train, if you're sprinting out in front, the train never connects. So you got to remember, okay, wait a minute, before we leave the station, let's connect as a D, and then let's move together. So just remember your pace, if you are a high D or high, is probably faster. Slow down, connect, begin with a personal comment. If you rush headlong into business or push too hard, you're likely to create tension, but you won't even know it because of the conflict avoidance. So be mindful of it and mind for it as well. So These two individuals are actually famous ISs. Probably recognize them as well. I don't know that you would picture like public figures like either Julia Roberts or Nelson Mandela as S's. It's fascinating when I see public speakers, pastors, uh, authors that speak on their content. A lot of times they are deeply introverted. They're S's, but you're getting the wisdom of all that introspection. But it's not the natural place. They do not feel comfortable in large groups, but they're able to channel that to bring what they have, their goodness. So don't necessarily think that, hey, if I'm an S, I can never do something that gets in front of people. Quite the contrary, we need to hear your voice more. So the C, as our final one, one of the emotions that might be connected with the C is fear. If you think about roles and compliance in our industry, what are they looking for? Risk mitigation, right? In all compliance, it's like we want to avoid lawsuits. We want to avoid perhaps having loans that aren't insurable. We want to avoid buybacks. It's about avoiding things. And naturally speaking, you do actually think as a high C, that's a wonderful role for them to play in because we need those details. Like the D, the direct communicators, they're task oriented. They're just more introverted by nature. But there's less of a tendency, I guess, if we play the passive aggressive, even though all of us can be, they're usually going to shoot straight. If you operate in the I range, you might get frustrated with C's because it'll feel like you're more concerned about procedures and constraints than you are about people. And in the mortgage business, aren't we about people? Like if you've ever had that thought, like why are all these policies there? Why are all these guidelines there? Or conditions that are being asked, it can be a problem. So this is a painful, quick story of myself as an originator. I remember having a conversation with the owner of the mortgage company. And he said, hey, Greg, you're really smart. In fact, I think you may know our guidelines better than most of our underwriters. He says, but do you know you have a reputation? I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, your reputation, you have a name. I'm like, no way. He says, yeah, you're the wave it king. All the underwriters and closers called me the wave it king. And he says, here's the deal. You're able to convince them to waive things, and we do, but you are actually winning battles and losing the war. They don't really want to underwrite your files anymore, Greg, because every time they condition something that is necessary, you get on the phone and you fight about it and you win, but you're losing the battles. It's like maybe put together more complete files. That stung. So I'm like, what do you mean? I put together complete files. It's like, you don't even take a complete 1003. Okay, so I'm a high D, high I, low S, low C. I understand underwriting guidelines. I understand the nuances of what makes a good loan and a bad loan, but how I show up and how things show up once they get into underwriting doesn't look so good. So a C was looking at me saying, you don't pay attention to deals nearly as much as you think you do. And I'm thinking every time you ask for a condition, it inconveniences the borrower and it creates a lesser experience. Until I realized I have to have somebody on my team that's high C to help me, I would have been stuck there. The good news is I was able to embrace the goodness of a C, realizing I desperately needed a C. And as gatherers, high I's create the opportunity for that tension with the high C. There's just a connectivity there. Any thoughts there, Dave?
Yeah, I guess we talked about some things as a salesperson you could do when approaching an S, go a little slower. What about a C? Let's say I'm a high DI or some variable with D in it. Any suggestions on how to think and how to plan as I go into a conversation with the C?
Yeah, so with a
as
C,
a prospect.
Exactly. With a C, understand that you both can dive straight into business. If you're in a D, like the task orientation, there is a beauty there. If you try and rush or gloss over details, that's where your disconnect's going to be. For a C, give them the facts and figures and the details. It matters to them. So if you think about like a classic borrower profile, and I never like to stereotype, but engineers tend to have a stereotype of being high Cs. If you've ever had a borrower that is an engineer, maybe even an attorney, someone that pays attention to details for their vocation, and you just say, hey, here's the bottom line, the rate's this and the payment's that. And they're like, wait a minute, I want to understand, like, what, total cost analysis will geek out a high C. They're going to see the details. They're going to understand the methodology. I think that's a beautiful thing about Mortgage Coach, quite frankly, is it allows pretty much, I think, every behavioral style to resonate with what's going on with their selections. So, but with that high C where you might have tension, and this might be more of a team, when you start to rush and ask for something to be done by the end of the day. So an example might be you come into a high C and you're like, hey, we're at letter A and we need to get to Z by the end of the day. The high C might be, okay, that's cool, but there's 24 letters between the A and the Z. And if you want us to do it right, we have to actually hit each of them. You're asking me to skip them. You want me just to go to A to Z. So do you want it done right or do you want it done now? And that push-pull conflict is really important to pay attention to. I'd recommend with a D, sometimes you have to understand, okay, their attention to detail is exactly what we need to pull off quality, but how do we also express urgency and see the bottom line of where we need to go? But generally speaking, every style has a strength that we have to embrace. Our key is to understand somebody else's language and then say, okay, based off of it, I'm coming from this perspective, you're coming from that perspective. How do we find something for a better outcome? Because we represent different perspectives, it's probably a better perspective together than it is individually.
So a note on that to every mortgage coach out there, the C is going to be more likely to not just want to look at the monthly difference. They're going to be more likely to want to see more options. So instead of maybe 2 options on a TCA, it's 3. And then they're going to be more interested in, okay, I want to click and see more information. Like they're going to be the one that sees more information. And they're going to be the one that also clicks and wants to see the itemized fee worksheet within the total cost analysis. So, 1, acknowledge that. 2, if you're trying to earn the trust and respect, lead with that. Like, hey, I'm really focused on details. I put a couple options together, and then go to the details. You're going to be more likely to accelerate the trust and just accelerate the service experience that family has. So 2 things I want you guys to think about. Like, before you go into meetings, lots of times you can anticipate based off of, like, I don't know about you, but when I go into a meeting, I've looked them up on LinkedIn, kind of got a feel for, what their job is, what their role is. And then based on how they approach the meeting, tonality and questions, you're identifying, is this person a high D, high I, high S, high C? And if they are a high C, don't make them get frustrated to the point to show you the details. Deliver that great service experience by getting into the details. And then lastly, let's say you didn't anticipate it. You're like, oh, this guy's a sales guy. He's a high DI. And next thing you know, he's nerding out on you and he's pushing you and acting like a C. Well, he probably is a C. So, be thinking from the time you meet someone and then keep an open mind throughout the conversation. What is the profile of this prospect? And guys, by the way, we're only halfway through the call. That's how you turn DISC into a competitive advantage. You're smart about it. You're aware about it. You've taken a DISC score yourself. In a minute here, we're going to tell you how you can get a DISC score through Greg and Building Champions. But if you have not done a DISC score, you should do it. If you have not done one in the past few years, you should redo it. It's one of those things where you want to stay sharp. Communication is the #1 thing that top producers all have in common. So, this is just a great tool. So anyways, keep it rolling, bro.
Yeah.
I'm loving this.
Yeah, it's fun. Since we're going to talk a little bit on behavioral selling, so it's where we're at. If you were to go into a lot of detail with an I, you will lose them as well. So know your audience for sure. And if you're like, how the heck do I know that? Well, I do think the first step is being really aware of yourself. As you practice this and you understand all the different styles, you'll start to intuitively understand maybe which style, and you can kind of test around and ask. You can be as point blank as, hey, do you prefer a lot of detail? Like, at what level of detail would you like me to go into? And they'll give you those clues. It's just a simple question that will start to unlock, okay, I get it. I know who I'm communicating with. But when you communicate purely from your style without even asking a simple question like that, you might miss it because you're just naturally communicating the way you do. So just a real quick, go ahead.
Real quick, you just reminded me too, by the way, in that interview that I shined a light on at the very beginning of this interview, Sean Herrera, I asked him to script out, like, how do you know, what's your value prop and why should people work with you? And he talked about, I'm an educator. And then I asked, well, like, give us the first minute of what that sounds like. And he had a great question. I can't remember it exactly, although I noticed that Keith Collins actually called it out. But he, actually, I'm trying to pull it up right now. But it was something, to paraphrase it, it was something to the effect that he starts the conversation with, hey, some people have lots of questions and some people kind of know what they want. And he just opened it up with, do you have a lot of questions or do you have a few questions? And it just triggered me when you were saying that he's really determining really early on. I would bet that the way a high I would answer that opening question, if you listen to the interview, would be very different than the way a high C or a high S would answer it. So again, when you're listening to the interview, make a note that there's a whole backstory to the disc test within it.
Absolutely.
Keep it going.
Thank you. This next slide, I don't want us to miss the mark on this one. There's a couple of things that we have to have in our maybe our head and our heart.
Real quick,
Go ahead.
Greg, a couple of people have asked if they're going to get these slides. Are you cool posting a link to these slides afterwards?
Absolutely. Yeah, all the content we're glad to share.
All right, guys, stay tuned for how to get access to the slides and more stuff for Building Champions.
Yeah. So a lot of times when we're in coaching sessions, we're dealing with conflict or disconnects between teammates, referral partners, wherever it may come from. And unless we operate from a spirit of assuming positive intent and understanding that everybody contributes value, we're going to key in on our differences and think we're right and they're wrong. I mean, it's a natural defense response, right? But this slide, I just want to drive home that whether it's your teams or your borrowers or your referral partners, understanding every style has beauty in them. Like in the D, they create urgency. When you start going to the top with a blend of a D and an I, seizing on opportunities, a pure I connects with people, an IS encourages, they share perspective, a pure S steps in to help their supporters. A blend of an S and a C is great with follow through. A C is great at analyzing in depth. And then the DC blend is challenging the system. So we were talking about the DS and the DC responses. If you think about like a DC, everything that's on the left part of this graphic, you're task oriented, oriented. If you're a DC, you challenge the system. You bring a ton of strength. But what happens in that, in challenging the system, you're probably going to have your greatest conflict with people that are I's and S's, people that want to feel and connect. If you're all task orientation, that's probably going to be the biggest area you need to work on. If you're a DS, you're actually an interesting blend because you can be extroverted and introverted. You can be very direct to the point or more introspective. And a D, if is creating urgency, and an S is about pace and consistency. It's always an interesting combo to be aware of and saying, okay, well, how do I show up? If I'm rare, how am I communicating? In DISC, we also, in a debrief, we'll start to triangulate. How do you actually communicate? Dave, even if you and I are high D, high I's, and I say, okay, we're going to talk about a list of do's and don'ts, and I want you to choose 3 or 4 of your do's and 3 or 4 of your don'ts based off of your behavioral style. You might start to show me that 80% of your preferred language is a D. If I tried to sell you as an I, even though you're a DI, I might disconnect with you. I might frustrate you. I may not go at the pace you want me to. So I have to take it a little bit deeper. When I'm getting into more what I'd consider intimate relationships, and I'm going to say that our borrowers, we have a quick time span to really connect with them. And then once the loan closes, your frequency of communication naturally drops off because there's not the direct need of getting a loan. There's all sorts of value adds you can be doing after, but your most intimate time is when they're either refinancing or purchasing a home. Contrary, your teammates, and your referral partners, I think you go deep. You don't just get a disc on yourself. These are the sort of people that you go through a disc exercise together, because they are a frequent relationship. So that's just a little aside. Any thoughts there, Dave, before we go to an infographic here?
So guys, I am loving this. I hope you're getting value. If you're a leader or a manager, I mean, this is worthy of scheduling a branch meeting, because we're talking about something that's not only going to help you operate better internally as a team, we're talking about something that's going to help every loan officer operate better in the marketplace, you know, building trust, delivering great service experience. So highly recommend re-listening to this with your team. No, keep it going, man. This is fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. So some just key words for you to keep in mind. Again, we'll share this, but with the D, decisions, like making decisions quickly. That's a big part of what a D's driver in the behavior is. Change, conflict, gestures, communication. Like, you're going to get a lot outwardly. A D shows themselves because they're not introverted. You're going to get that, but decisions, change, conflict, gestures, and communication. So these are quick tells, especially if you are working with a borrower for the first time or a realtor. Notice maybe even the body language. It might start to show you, okay, I think I might have a D in front of me. They're quick and they're decisive. They're good at action. They just don't have a problem diving into conflict. This sort of hand movement, the energy that you get, you're going to pick up some of that. You might even see Daniel and I, as brothers, our personalities are quite different, but our behavioral styles are identical. We're both high D, high I's, right on top of each other. But with Daniel, he's a drummer, and I always see his foot, you know, tapping. It's like, okay, he's in high D mode. His motor's going quickly. And that's when you kind of know you're getting a tell. All right, probably need to pick up the pace. So just little things that we pay attention to. You know, you want to make sure that you're direct and to the point. That's making you smile, Dave. What's
well, I'm a high D too, and I love the way you use the word the tell. You know, like, notice you're watching how the other person is interacting with you, body language. You know, this is how you turn your communication into a competitive advantage. So anyway, I'm loving it.
Awesome. Thank you. So in decision making for an I, quick and impulsive. It's usually an emotional decision. You know, research pretty much has told us most of our purchases are emotional purchases, but with an I, even more so, probably the details aren't as important. On the change, goods action, it's a good positive thing towards change. Like, you're less change adverse as an I. In conflict, this is where it gets interesting. As you were asking, passive aggressive. So I don't know if you looked through all of the slides. I just didn't want to limit it to an I, because I think we all have a tendency to play that role sometimes. But yeah, an I is definitely going to take flight and avoid. I mean, it's just more of a tendency. The gestures, the facial expressions. You know, you usually know an I because they're not hiding the emotion. You can see it. They're probably not good poker players. In the communication, long conversations, tone variation, the poor listening, that might be natural, but I think everybody can learn to become a better listener. But the instinctive is probably more talking, less listening. The ratio, you know, I remember years ago I was told, you know, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. Probably a good mantra for any I. So,
real quick before we go off I, the reminder on that was, when it comes to the total cost analysis, probably less options, like show, hey, here's 2 options, maybe not 3 or 4. And in the video, while everybody likes the personal connection and the narrative of video, the I is really going to appreciate that personal connection. You want out of their way to show up and explain the details. And they want to know the details are there. They just don't want to get into them, you know? So video, less options for an I.
Yeah, that's spot on. For S's, the decisions, slow and methodical. An S might be indecisive. My son is a classic S. And even as a kid, I knew he was an S because we'd go into the grocery store to pick a candy, and he would sit in front of the candy aisle for like 20 minutes. It's like, dude, make a decision. It's candy. It's all good. You know, this is a treat. But he would like just labor over making a decision as simple as candy. But it was that slow and methodical, and I'm in my high D. Come on, we've got things to do, so you see that conflict. With an S, understand the pace that they're operating from. S is typically most change adverse. They prefer stability. So anytime you go through sort of change management, you have to keep in mind the impact it has internally on an S. They'll avoid conflict and bottle up emotions. They'll use hands, but not big sweeping gestures. Then communication, it's warm, friendly, concerned. Now, unlike the I, they're a good listener. Go ahead, Dave.
Hey, real quick, someone had just asked a question. I've got a high school student, 16 years old. Do you think DISC score would be good for them? What ages do you recommend for anybody that's on this call that's a parent and wants to bring leadership to their kids? Any thoughts on that?
As long as they're interested, I would do it. My youngest son at 10 years old took Myers-Briggs, DISC. He was interested in all these different profiles. Now, when somebody's a little bit younger, they may not be as self-aware. So I'd say take it with them. If they're wondering, hey, am I more like this or less like that? Help them maybe in the assessment, be there when they take it, because they may not necessarily know as much how they show up. So you can help them through it, but I strongly recommend it. 16 is not too young.
Yeah, and I like that, as long as they're interested. I mean, if you're making them do it, it may not have as much value as if they're, yeah, that would be really interesting. I want to do it.
Exactly. So, yeah, but
good leadership.
Yeah, thank you. Great question too. So the C's, for decisions, they want the info. Analysis is key. With change, they're okay with it, but the effects of change, you need to show me the data that if we're going to change, it's well worth it, and that we've thought about all the risks. Conflict, might avoid it, but they'll challenge assumptions. The gestures are very reserved. When I was saying an I may not be a good poker player, a C probably is a great one. They might be analyzing the deck. They may not be showing the emotions. And with communication, they're just direct and precise and quiet. So these are the profiles, but I really want to show you an infographic real quickly. And then, Dave, if you want us just to open up to questions, I think that would be perfect. But are you able to see this infographic that's showing right now?
No, you're still in presentation mode. We're seeing the healthy conflict borrower, so you might want to take down the PowerPoint and then reshare.
Perfect.
So guys, as we're getting ready to pull this up, if you have questions down below, we definitely have time for them. We'll tell you, what we recommend is some of the best places to get a test, and Building Champions has a really cool offer for you guys, so stay tuned for that. All right, old US versus new US. Got it.
Yeah. So I was just curious as far as percentages of people, like what's the latest. So I did a little research on this. And here's what I want you to see. I mean, there hasn't been a ton of change. I's have increased in newer, but generally speaking, the highest percentage, even in the newer report in the United States, is 38% of people might be I's. Okay. If you go globally, you're looking at 30% might be I's, right? And then you've got the different styles, S's. So people orientation might be a little bit higher percentage globally. Here's the real point that I want you to look at with either one of these. It's this. Chances are you're only speaking to maybe 30% of the population in your native behavioral language. That means 70% may not connect with you. So, and we tend to operate in what we know or what we prefer. Even if you've studied things like the 5 love languages, we tend to love in ways we want to be loved rather than maybe what our spouse wants to be loved as, because they have a different love language. Well, in DISC, it's the same thing. We tend to communicate the way we prefer communication. So that means we have a high risk of disconnect and not communicating effectively. So that self-awareness of who you are. Go ahead, Dave.
No, you killing it. I was just giving you a little mic drop right there.
Oh, gotcha. That is the biggest thing that I want people to really take away from this, is understand that you probably think your communication style is better than everybody else's. That's good, but it's not going to connect with a lot of people. until you learn. You know, and I think of, I showed an image of our current president, but Ronald Reagan. What was his moniker? You remember?
Oh my gosh.
Great.
Go ahead.
A great communicator, right? Do I recall that right? You think about, you have two presidents maybe on the same sort of political platform, right? Maybe represent very similar things. How Reagan communicated was quite different. Like if you could be considered a great communicator as an individual, what does that look like for you? And it starts with DISC. It doesn't end with DISC, but it starts with this, because if I can understand my behavior and the language of others, I'm able to connect with people that don't think like me. In fact, I can tap into people's perspectives that are different than mine and have a much better outcome because of it. So I see it as a huge competitive advantage.
I do too, man. I love this call. I'm proud to have this in the Mortgage Coach YouTube channel. I highly recommend, the leaders on this call and the people that manage people, as we're closing out the decade and we're kicking off a new decade, that you really, take inventory of yourself, you take inventory of your team, and we use this as an opportunity to upgrade our listening skills, how we connect. I was doing a little mic drop because you're so right. Like, I am a high D. By the way, that means that like 80% of the people that I'm communicating with are different than me, and so it's important that you're looking for those tells. You're humble. Don't believe everything you think. Now, if you literally have the highest conversion rate of anybody in your company, anybody you know what? You probably are a really good communicator, and now you should be a leader and kind of like help upgrade other people. But be honest with yourself, guys. If you don't have the highest conversion rate of anybody you know, this is probably the path to improving that. Like, communicate with people the way they want. Because while I am Mr. Mortgage Coach, and a total cost analysis is the most comprehensive way to deliver advice to a family, I tell people all the time, too much information is just as bad, just as damaging to your sales process as too little information. And so if you're like, oh, I've got all these options, I've got total cost, look at these details, and you're talking to a high I, they're like, whoa, man, that's just too much. So it's like every family deserves a TCA, but how you deliver it, how much detail you get into it, depends on their learning style. So this has been awesome, dude. So first of all, for anybody that wants to themselves take a DISC score, their team get a DISC assessment, I know you've got a way through yourself of building champions that they could do that. Tell everybody how we can go to the next step.
Yeah, so we've created a landing page just for you if you're interested. We have a link that will be posted in the Facebook page, and just fill out your information and say, hey, I'm interested, and then we'll reach out to you. When Dave and I are talking, and thank you for your desire to promote us. I mean, you've always been such a great partner. There is a hard cost of the assessment, but we would give a debrief at no cost, which is, as we discussed, it's a much higher value that we want to offer. So if you're interested, the first step is reaching out when we send out the landing page. I would strongly recommend, if you know DISC yourself, if you have not done DISC on your key people and your teams, your key referral partners, like, go deep. You want to add value and create something unique or different. I'm guessing most of your competitors will not take the time to want to understand the behavioral language of the people you're doing business with. That will set you apart straight out of the gate. And you build relationships for life when you start it on the right foundation. So
two things, guys. So first of all, it's $80. So that's their cost. That's the Building Champions cost for doing it. And it comes with a consultation, which is worth, $1,000, guys. So there's huge value in this. Highly recommend it. Check out the link. Also, I am really impressed with Dave Ramsey. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the Dave Ramsey organization, but I recently took a tour of the Dave Ramsey organization in the new campus that they built, which, by the way, if you go to Nashville, whether you agree with all of his advice, you agree with his politics, he has built an amazing platform. And as you walk around, every single employee, it's got their name tag, and it's got their DISC score. You know, he has just, you know, really invested in that. And there's more companies. I mean, there's lots of case studies where we can talk about how DISC can help people communicate better. So I recommend, you know, go to that link, check it out. It'll be in comments. If you're watching this recorded or live, we'll put a link in comments. Also, I've asked Building Champions, Greg or someone on his team, to make a post on how you guys could get this. So guys, do it. And then I would just ask also, if you're someone that's gotten value from taking the test or going through the team process, and you just want to share a success story, you know, let us know down below in comments. You know, let us know the value that you got from that. So Greg, we got 5 minutes left. First of all, before I ask another question, anything you want to make sure gets covered or gets shared in the session that we're having right now?
I have some closing thoughts, but whenever appropriate, we're good. So.
Well, why don't you do your closing thoughts, and then I'll ask the question if we have time.
Yeah, awesome. I think number one, I would encourage you to be curious. That's number one. When it comes to people, be curious. And when you're curious, you want to understand somebody else's perspective. We have what we call confirmation biases, often where it's a protection mode, where a lot of our confirmation biases are to find out why we're right and somebody else is wrong. Throw that out the door when it comes to relationships. And if you can do that, then you start to see that somebody's DISC style, if it's different than yours, isn't better or worse. It's just different. So how do I find that common place to connect? DISC is one thing, but there are so many different behavioral assessments. My main concern for all of you would be that you would just constantly seek to understand other people. It's been quoted a bunch of times, but you know, first seek understanding before being understood. If you can lean in with that posture and use DISC as a really helpful tool, it's going to go a long way in everything you do.
I love that. Be curious. Don't believe everything you think, and really seek to understand people more than you seek to be understood. Love those closing thoughts. So Mike Gordon just came in and he said, Greg, any suggestions on creating an ongoing conversation with team so that DISC stays top of mind and not just a one and done exercise? Thoughts?
Yeah, there's some great team exercises, but a real quick thing, Mike, is when we go and do this with a team and everybody shares their do's and don'ts of communicating, it's just the top 3 or 4 do's and don'ts based off of your profile. Create a matrix, a cheat sheet, and have everybody on the team put it on their desk. I mean, laminate it, keep it in front of you at all times. So if you go into a conversation, this is so top of mind that it becomes ingrained, it becomes natural, and you naturally start speaking DISC language, and you understand who you are. And when you go into it, if you're having conflicts, you can go back to that as well and say, okay, wait a minute, I just had a conflict with somebody, and oh, dang it, I just violated one of their don'ts. Go back to it, keep it in front of you. But that's a simple task, but just creating the awareness, saying this is so important with what somebody just shared with me on how to communicate with them. I'm laminating that and I'm putting it on my desk, and it never goes away. It can't be covered by other papers because this is about the people I work with. So
one last question I have. So let's say I'm on this and I lead someone. It's me and someone else. They watch this call. They're pumped. They're like, oh, you know, I want to go through this. They want to sign up. How would you recommend they share that with someone else? You know, because there's a way where you're overbearing and you talk about this and people are just like, no, thank you. And then there's a way where, how would you recommend a leader socializes this if they want to have one or their team go through your Discord? Any thoughts?
Yeah, one thing you don't do is say, here's my DISC, learn how to communicate with me. It's a mutual exchange. I think you would share it to socialize and say, I just went through this experience and it was incredible self-awareness for me. And what I realize is I have a style and it may or may not work best with you. I'd love for you to join me so I can understand how to more effectively communicate with you and you with me. Would you be willing to do that? That's the way I would begin it.
Boom. So lead by example. Have taken the test yourself. For all you leaders out there, take the test yourself and then, you know, meet people where they're at. I took it. It was amazing. I would love if you take it so that we can communicate better. I could be a better leader to you, or we could be a better team. So, dude, you killed it. Everybody watching this, if you got value, give us a like. Comments, we love comments, whether it's a quote that you got, a question that you have. Greg will follow this thread for a day. And, you know, if you have questions, put them down below. Greg Harkavy, man, thank you for bringing so much value to the community, and safe travels, dude.
Thank you. Great being with you all.
Take care, everybody. This call is a wrap. Later.